Welcome back, and I thought today would be a good day to start a new model, and we are going to work on the Apogee Mako today, which is a mid-power model. They call it skill level 3. It's a very easy model to get into for anybody who's been doing low power stuff, Estes, A through D, and some E engine models, and who are starting to think about, okay, well, I want something maybe a little bit bigger, maybe go a little bit higher, and are starting to think, well, let's what would be a good mid-power model for me to begin with. Um, I personally love mid-power kits. I love mid-power kits because they can be relatively inexpensive, and they can get very large. You'd be surprised at how big mid-power kits can get, but they're inexpensive, and their motors are inexpensive, and they can also get a pretty good height even with mid-power motors. You can see even with this is the Mako, like I said, and from Apogee Components, and they're showing you the estimated altitudes with composite motors here. An E24 would go up to 541 feet, not very high, but you can see how quickly they get to a decent height. An F20 Aerotech F20 will send it up to 1100 feet. An F67 will go up to 1500 feet. These are all low power stuff. All the way up to a G40 will send it close to 2000 feet, and a G72 would send it a little over 2000 feet. G80 is the highest low power engine that you can get. That's the highest one you can get without a level 1 high power license. And as you can see, you can send this isn't a big model, and you can send it close to 2,300 feet on G80. So these are a lot of fun. Mid power models tend to be a little bit louder. They're just more they're fun to watch go off. And like I said, you can get some pretty big mid power kits. And have a lot of fun before you start going into high power. So that's part of the reason why I like mid power so much. In the meantime, let's go ahead and get started on this one. I've been in the mood to build this for a little while here, so let's see what we can do. First of all, for anybody who is thinking about getting into mid power, you're going to find that most of the building supplies are identical. Most of the building supplies are the exact same as what you were doing in low power stuff. Premium wood glue. I love using Type Bond 2. That's my go-to. You're gonna use a couple different kinds of CA cement, and I like to use off some Zip Kicker as well. Standard stuff for low power: scissors, tape, ruler, pencil, X-Acto knives. Everything here that you see is stuff that you've always used before for any Estes low power kit. The only thing that might be different as you start going into this is you may start using epoxy. I like to use 5-minute epoxy, and I also use 30-minute epoxy for certain bonds, and other things like JB Weld. JB Weld is an epoxy, a nice thick epoxy putty. This stuff is fantastic. I use this for fillets all the time. We'll get into that as we get into the build. But let's get started and see what we can see. All right, let's go ahead and open up the package here. Now the Mako has a reinforced 3-inch tube. That's going to be your shot card. That's a Kevlar line. The Mako has a 29mm motor mount. You're going to have a parachute protector, which will help cut down on dog barf or anything else that you use for protecting your parachute, wadding, for instance. And since it's a medium-sized model, it's going to take a 30-inch parachute. And your fins. You can see here the fins are made of plywood instead of balsa, which is good in a lot of ways because it's actually a lot easier to sand this. You don't need to use as much sanding sealer filler. The Mako has some really, really cool, very reflective vinyl stickers for their decals. And there we go. There's the rest of the parts there. And for the Mako, you're going to be using rail buttons. It does give you the option to use launch lugs as well if you choose to. I'm not going to use the launch lugs. I'm just going to go straight for the rail buttons. But you can absolutely use both. You just put them on either side of the tube. The Mako's got everything pre-cut for you, including it's going to have through-the-wall fins, which is really, really nice. Makes things a lot easier to align. And it's also got pre-cut for the rail buttons right here. And you could just put a launch lug on another side over here if you choose to. If you want to run this off of just a smaller Estes launch pad, you would definitely need to send this on the 1/4 inch launch rod. Nothing smaller than that. But it's going to be rails for us, so we'll see what we can get into here. I'm going to just set this aside. And there's the instructions. Let me clean this up and we will get started with the beginning of the instructions here, which, just like any other Estes kit, is going to be the motor mount. 2 minutes into the video, and it looks like I lied to you already, so sorry about that. The first step of this is actually going to be installing the rail buttons, because it's difficult to get the rail buttons in once you've put the motor mount in place. Now this one here, it's kind of hard to reach. You can't really get up in there to put the backing of the rail button in. So it wants you to, the instructions tell you to take a piece of tape and just lightly fold it over and put it on anything long that you have. It was suggesting a spare bit of wood, spare bit of balsa, which we don't really have right now because we haven't got anything that would require it. But I have plenty of this brass sitting around the shop, so I'm just going to use that. And very lightly place that like so. And use some thick super glue. Don't get super glue into the threads here. You don't want that because that's going to ruin. But you just place a little bit of super glue on either side here and here. And let's see if we can get that aligned. There we go. All right, once that's in place, let's go ahead and keep it in place by putting the rail button on and a single screw. And I'm going to screw this in. And I'm holding it up, putting positive pressure from the inside. As best as I can, anyway. There we go. I should be able to remove this now. There we go. And that's the first rail button installed. And I'm gently tightening it up. I'm not tightening it too much right now. Now we should be able to see from the inside here. Let's see if we can get a view in there of the rail button down near the bottom. Yep, there you go. Now the other rail button will be really easy to do because you can easily reach it. I'm still going to put a little dab of super glue on the flange to hold it, there, there. Like so. Okay. That's the rail button sorted and ready to go. Let's go ahead and move on with the next step, which is going to be just to very lightly sand on the inside here. Now you could use your fingernail for this. Basically, you're just chamfering this edge. This is also going to be something that's very familiar for most people in low power. All you're doing here is just getting rid of that lip. To make it easier to slide the coupler in on that side, and easier, yeah, there's a big lip there, and a little bit easier to slide the motor mount on this side. All right, let's set that aside for a moment and move on over to the motor mount. Very good. The first thing they want us to do with the motor mount is go ahead and mark 2 spots. And whenever I see something that says front end or back end, I like to make a notation of that. Just so that I don't make a mistake later on. Wants me to mark about 1/4 inch. And then another one at 2 1/8. And we'll set that aside for a little bit. The reason why it's asking you here to sand 2 of the centering rings flat, and they've even got a spot marked out for it, is because you're going to have to move them past this rail button that you just placed here. And it's going to be really hard to do that without the edges being, because they're going to go in perfectly flush, and you need to be able to move it past that rail button. So we're going to go ahead and take 2 of these sanding rings here. And if you have a belt sander or any kind of shop sander, it's going to be a lot easier. And I do, but not where the camera is right now, so I'm not going to be bothered to move the camera out of the way. I don't really think it needs to be sanded all the way to that marked line, but we're going to go ahead and do it anyway. We're going to follow the instruction the way they asked for it. All right, now that we've done one, let's just take some of that dust away. I'm going to try something different with the second one, because I noticed that that's cut through pretty well. So we're going to use a nipper and see how that does. Oh yeah. I hope nobody minds that I'm doing this on the fly with you. I haven't built this particular model before myself, and I'm just following the directions. But when I see something that's slightly easier to do, I'm just going to test it to see. And since that was, they've done it on all three of them. You see how there's a serrated line there, and it's cut through a fair amount of the wood. See, it's on both sides. And so that was much easier to just use the nippers to take off. And once that's done, when this is all glued in, you see it'll be easy to slide right over that rail button right there. Cool. Okay. Now we're going to use a round needle file to file a notch large enough for the shot cord to fit through in the inner hole on one of the flattened centering rings. No problem. We can do that. I'll just go ahead and use this one here. I'm going to assume that it's probably best to put it on, it doesn't say, but I'm going to put it on the side opposite of the flat that we've just created here. And what I like to do when I'm using a needle file and I'm trying to file through is I'll come in at a pretty strong angle on one side and give myself some tooth to grab onto. And then I'll rotate it around and do the same on the opposite side. It makes it cut a little faster. Okay, so we just need this just big enough to fit this aramid cord or Kevlar cord. That's pretty close, but I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit more there. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's see how that's going to look in comparison to the cord. I think we'll be all right there. Okay, so with this model, it suggests that you can use wood glue or epoxy for these steps here, and it suggests that if you're planning on building this as a high power model, to use epoxy. I'm gonna give you a little secret. This thing is never gonna need anything other than wood glue for these parts, because wood glue is actually fine for pretty much any level 1 high power model that you're going to be making. Anything with an H or a 29 millimeter I motor is not going to have enough kick to really need epoxy in this step. Now, if you want to use it to practice, please be my guest. Go ahead and do it. I've done that in the past myself because it's good practice to do. But you'll see even instructions on some of the Apogee high power kits, such as the Zephyr or the Peregrine or the Katana. They use wood glue for a lot of their motor mount sets, because it's really not necessary to use anything stronger than wood glue for these. Now, I know there's going to be a dozen people or more who are like, no, if it's high power, it needs epoxy. Okay, that's fair. I don't want to, rain on your parade, and if you want to use epoxy, please do. But for a small kit like this is just a 3-inch model. It's never going to need it's probably never going to go anything stronger than an H motor. You're not really going to need it. So first of all, I'm just going to double check this. I'm going to put my cord through here. I just want to make sure that I've given myself enough room. Yeah, no problem. No problem. Okay, good. But this is not the one that we're going to do right now. We're going to start with the one that was about 2 inches. So we'd marked to 2 1/8, and it's telling us to put this on this side so that the centering ring is on the front and that mark is on the aft, so that, because this is an 1/8 inch, this is 1/8 inch thick plywood, so there'll be 2 inches of leeway right here. Now what I like to do whenever I'm doing motor mounts, and some people don't like doing this because they think that the super glue affects the consistency of the wood glue or the integrity of the bond. I've done this a long time. I've never had that problem. And I am pushing this just a little forward of that 2 1/8 mark. There we go. That's more than enough glue there. You can see, I can still see my 2 1/8 inch mark, which I'm going to push it towards here. And I'm creating a little bit of a fillet on this side. And on the back side, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and tack this into place with just a little drop on 2 sides of the thick set CA. All that's going to do is keep it from wiggling around. That's all I want it to do. That's all it's going to do. It's not, this isn't structural in any way, shape, or form. I got a minute or two to make sure that that's aligned. That's looking pretty good. Doesn't have to be dead perfect, but I want it to be as close to as possible. And now the CA has already started doing its job, so I can let it sit like this for a minute. And in the meantime, let's go ahead and prepare our Kevlar cord for the next step. Let's see if I gave myself enough. Nope, didn't give myself enough room there. Try that again. I'm just doing a very simple square knot in this case here. This is a pretty tight fit here. And it's going to want this on the aft side like so. What I'm doing right now is just test fitting everything as I go along. Before I add any glue, I want to make sure that I'm not going to do something that's going to screw it up. So this basically wants you to do this right here. It's going to be over this ring. The cord's going over that ring, but underneath this ring here, and then you're going to glue all of that in place. So let's go ahead and move this aside, move this down just a little bit so that we can apply our glue. Whoop, that's way too much. That's okay. I'll need that for later anyway. This is why we keep paper towels around. This ring is very, very tight. Okay. And I don't even need to apply any more glue here because I've created a nice fillet as I push that forward. And I can bond these two together pretty well, just like this. And same thing for right now. I'm going to go ahead and put just a little bit of CA on either side here to tack this in place, because I'm going to do some wood glue fillets on the other side here in just a second. Boop, boop, and done. I'm just going to hold that in place for a moment while the CA sets. I'm going to do a couple more. Okay, good. That's not going anywhere. And now what we're going to do is we're going to apply a generous amount of glue over the actual Kevlar cord here. The nice thing about this glue is that as it dries, it dries a little flexible, which is a good thing. When the Kevlar gets stuck with CA cement, that's not flexible, and that can actually damage the Kevlar and make it tear and rip, which we don't want. And once this is all said and done, I'm going to come back here and clean this up a little bit here. Make sure we get some glue in on the knot so that the knot does not untie itself. I cannot, said Piglet. Hope somebody got that reference. Okay, now that that's done, I'm going to just take a second and wrap up the cord here so that I can stuff it into the motor mount tube. And I'm just doing this to keep it out of the way while this glue dries. There we go. Bada bing, bada boom. Now this particular fillet up here, I'm going to just go ahead and give it a little bit more meat to it. Not a lot more. That's good. Now while this dries, I'm going to talk about just a part of the instructions that I saw that when I read through them was sort of a gotcha moment for myself, because I don't want anybody else to run into that and make the mistake that I didn't make, but I thought I was gonna be doing. Because these particular fins, you'll notice on the back of the fin can, there's a notch here in the middle that these fit into. Now that actually happens a lot with some high power kits, where one of the centering rings will actually fit into the notch and will fit snugly here, not like this huge amount of gap that you see here, but one of the centering rings would be sitting like this, and the fin would go essentially like that. I'm just using this as a guide to give you an idea. That is not the case with this particular model. There will not be a centering ring between the split in the fin. There won't be a centering ring sitting right here. These two centering rings here, in fact, are going to be way up here. And then you'll have one more centering ring at the back right over here. So this is going to sit like so eventually. And the reason why they've done this is they've put two centering rings here so that this will be nice and centered and firm to allow you to put internal fillets into the rocket before you seal it up with the aft centering ring. But I just wanted people to be aware of that. Like, there will not be a centering ring sitting here. I suppose if you wanted to, you could modify it yourself so that you could do that. I'm not going to on this case. You'll also notice that with these fins here, they have the same pattern. They have the same cutout pattern that the centering rings had. And the reason for that is because this kit gives you options, one of which includes, instead of a 29 millimeter motor mount, you can buy separately a 38 millimeter motor mount. And if you buy and build this model with the 38 millimeter motor mount, you're going to have to remove this section here when you plug this in, because these will be too long. These will be too long in here, and you won't be able to fit them in with the 38 millimeter motor mount. But just wanted to give you a heads up on that, in case you were wondering why these had a cutout here in this spot, and whether or not you need to use the centering rings for that. But I'm going to pause this for just a moment right at this spot, and when I come back for the second round, this glue will be dry, and we'll go ahead and begin the glue up for the motor mount into the aft section of the rocket. See you then.